Tasks that were to be done tonight, and maybe we can get back about that first. The first was Rich Steffens and Mike were going to work on the zoning inconsistencies. Did you guys have a chance to get together on that?
No, we haven't. I did have the R requirements, but I haven't heard from Rich.
Okay.
I was out for a little.
So we'll have to put that. Obviously, we'll reschedule a meeting more soon than the last gap.
Yeah.
Because there's something people missing. But second, the planning board process inconsistencies. Ariana and Tom, you guys were going to get.
Yeah, we met. We sat down with the two forms, went over each one of these items on the forms. We found that there were plenty of unimportant inconsistencies that were historically explainable.
Useful to keep in place, or things that should be jettisoned?
We believe that if the two chairs and Kurt sat down for a 3-hour meeting, you could have one form with whatever additional codicils, if you want to call them that, were necessary to facilitate any differences between the towns.
Sure. And Kurt, we're already working on that internally for the village anyway.
It would
make sense.
I think. In other words, we found that there was there was nothing that was like incontrovertibly difficult to resolve between the two. I've spoken briefly with Maurice about this as well. And he said, well, fine, we could figure out how to do this.
So Kurt, Mike, and Maurice, that's right with you, Mike?
Yep.
Sound good? And Kurt, you can set that up without a problem?
Why don't you set that up, Kurt,
Yeah.
and
No problem.
Call Kelly, and we'll work it around that.
Perfect. Perfect timing. We're just to Linda and Catherine.
And that's us.
Talk about ZBA process inconsistencies. So
Okay.
take a breath. You don't need to rush.
Okay. I'm actually sort of looking at the outlet situation.
One right there and one right over here.
If it's better over here, I can swing around.
No, we got an empty chair right
There's an outlet
here.
right here.
Okay. I gotta run down and get my pen anyway.
Plug in.
So actually, why don't we just come back? Why don't we just come back to that? And I suppose we can hear from Dave on these maps he's provided and what they are, and then come back to Linda and Katie, and then talk about what work we have left and what time frame we can do that in. So I guess, Dave, you want to talk about what these great maps are?
It's just to try to put the zoning of the village and show the surrounding town zoning, and then Mike and Rich were going to take that and look for consistencies or inconsistencies on that. So get this to Mike and Rich in the last week, I guess. I've been away. So.
Well, the village is really only surrounded by two zones, the R1 and the B2. Right? And then the FF, I suppose, down there at the very bottom.
Yeah, there's some flood fringe.
Yeah, a little bit.
There's
little industrial. Is it I1 industrial? Is that what that is?
Yes. Here.
Yeah, tiny little edge here. So does Mike's here, but do you know what the R1 is? Do you know what the R1 density is off the top of your head, Dave, by any chance?
Yes. Wow, thank you.
Do you know what the R1 means in the town?
It's the 1 acre residential zone.
1 unit per acre?
Right.
Okay. And R1 is the same, or is that, do you know? Because I can't recall.
Well, no, we don't require 1 acre. We have, as you know, R1, R2, and R3, and I think it's something in the order of maybe approximately 15,000 feet, maybe 7,500 square feet, and then down to about...
So the village is surrounded by 1 acre minimum, basically, except for a couple of spots. Except for the two little flags, the B2, and then...
Right. R1 can go down to a ½ acre if there is water and sewer service, central water and sewer service. There's also provisions for clustering that can tighten up the footprint of the development, but you still are required to have the same density as far as 1 acre.
Was there anything that would be productive to talk about tonight, or just have that explanation and now Mike and Rich have this aid to do their work for the next meeting? Is that the plan?
Let me introduce Kelly.
Oh, yeah.
Please.
To you folks. She is secretary for the ZBA, secretary for planning for the town.
She's highly efficient. She is more knowledgeable than most of us.
And she's working with Stacy as a code enforcement officer for.
That's right, that too. And
the
she's
town.
actually here as a representative, a delegate for Stacy, our building inspector.
Great. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
I know.
Hi, everybody.
I would like to make perhaps one
Please,
general
of course.
comment, and that has to do with the exercise that's identified as, of course, what we're talking about, the districts, and I think what we chose to call compatibility between the zones. Of course, all of the regulations associated with the village and the town, respectively, all the everything from area and bulk to uses, of course, is the product of a fair amount of policy making at the highest levels of local government. So at least the recognition, I think, is important that, for example, if you take the village's B1 district, which abuts the town's B2 district, you'll see, of course, in addition to difference in parcel sizes, that the regulations as to what's allowed in, for example, the setback, the village has sort of a 0 lot line desired, whereas in the B2 in the town, it is a 65-foot front yard required. So and I was thinking about this last time, and then it came to me that the acknowledgement is that, of course, we have regulations that have come about as the result of master planning and policy making that we can only reconcile so much within our group, and then we need to appeal to the village board and town board.
Well, I don't think there was any intention of, making sure that they link. It's just understanding where the differences are, and do you want to continue one? How do you play it at the edge? Do you blend it in? Do you come to an abrupt end? What are the consequences on it? I think that's what we're really going to be looking for, because obviously we're not going to have the same type of zoning throughout the area.
Yep.
It's just that you didn't want to come with a very dense area and then stop dead and then go to a very open area. Maybe some merging towards in between that. But I don't think we're trying to match them up identical. But it's good to know the reasons behind some of the stuff. It's helpful.
Actually, and
I
your
think
point.
the 65 feet too came with the DOT's someday, some way, Main Street was going to be widened, and that was still going to give setbacks to the buildings. 15 plus years ago, the village and the town met with the DOT, and they said that was just not going to happen, without.
But the zoning laws and the town never changed to compensate for it.
And just along the lines of what Mike said, indeed it's true. As you see, the easternmost portion of the village along Main Street and the westernmost portion of the B2 in the town, of course, where those two zones meet at the border, there actually is some blending, and I think it's partly by a result of the time at which those parcels were developed. I think the thinking and planning was somewhat similar. Even the village may have thought at that end of town that there could have been some highway improvements, and that the pattern there is different than when you get into our core B2 district and even the initial portion towards the east of the B1 district. So again, if nothing else, it's interesting to note as we go through this exercise.
Okay.
Okay.
And with that, we'll hear more about that next time. Linda and Katie, you want to talk with the ZBA?
We met. What we did was talk more about our forms than about our procedures, many of which are mandated by the state. So that, as you know, the ZBA has to do this balancing act when you have an applicant, the benefit to the applicant as compared to the detriment to the community. And there are 5 criteria. The big difference, and that's what we have to use to come to a determination. The big difference we found was in the forms that we used.
Yes.
In as much as the town forms seem to be more comprehensive and more detailed.
Yes.
And so there was something that I don't know, Katie.
Yeah, I thought that we could probably take a look at those forms and perhaps make some changes that would make the meetings run along more clearly.
Mm-hmm.
The other big difference was what we are charging and what the town is charging, and I think the town's probably got a more realistic
In what
cost
way?
recovery schedule.
Application
The
fee.
application
What's the
fees.
difference?
Oh,
Well,
like
250 to 70, you're charging $70. we're charging
$75.
$250. And I did that calculation maybe 2 years ago, and I roughly, it was not mathematically precise, but I roughly estimated how much we paid the building inspector to go out on visits, how much we paid the secretary, which is not nearly enough, but the amount of hours that she would have to spend with each application. And our lawyer sits in on every one of our meetings and how much we pay the lawyer.
Right.
And we were not charging anywhere nearly enough. And even now, probably there are instances where the application fee does not cover the charges that are incurred. But yours are awfully low.
Yeah, I mean, when you consider that it probably costs $35 just to put the notice in the newspaper, that leaves $40 to pay for
Right.
the office support and the building inspectors.
Well, right before you guys got here, we were talking about the planning board process, and Mike and Maurice and Kurt are going to sit down about that. And so I'm imagining, Kurt, you'd already had some thoughts about the ZBA process for the village as well. And
I think
we might as
we
well just
should.
do the same, to get everyone procedurally on the same page at least would be nice.
Yeah, I think just want to draw it out a little further on that. We're working, and we'll probably have a new set of numbers in January, but to separate out the application fee and an escrow account that each individual applicant would establish, because some of these things are just strictly straightforward, and there isn't a heck of a lot of complications to the matter, and other things really get bogged down into very detailed work, and you're running up consultant fees to take a look at some of this stuff, and you need some way to cover it. So we have been using escrow accounts, but we're gonna merge it better with our application fee on that.
Jason, let me give you a copy. This is the material that I gave to Katie already. It starts with simply the fee schedule, and then after that, it goes to the application form itself, which gives you a more comprehensive, concise place to look things up if you have to review the applicant.
Let me see. That's very useful. Thank you, Linda.
So that's for you guys.
Thanks.
The end, there's a reference, there's a page that was taken from the county ruling that would not be given to the applicant, but it's just there for information purposes, and then something for the end. You see where the application itself would end. You can figure it out. It's 4 pages.
So we have, we got the updates on 3 tasks. The other 2 that we were asked to complete, maybe we can go over that for a second, and then I have one other question. The next one was create common definitions for the village and the town. And now the village is in the midst of redoing all of our definitions. Is that something we feel that we can, or under what conditions we could, or the point of this committee, like the other 8 or so, is to answer, well, for us it's, what about planning does the community need to know? What information about how planning would change under consolidated government does the community need to know to make an informed decision about this subject? So I guess, given no other guidance, we have 2 other questions to complete. Creating a common definitions, and is this something we feel we have the resources and time and expertise to do, and how does the village attorneys work deal with that, or impact that? The other one was create compatible zones, which is so broad I'm not quite sure exactly what it means, but it could just be that obviously we based on what Tom and Rich bring, or not Tom and Rich, Mike and Rich bring back.
Yeah.
Because the zones may be roughly compatible as is, and I suppose that conversation is more usefully held, at the town and village meetings rather than, at a certain point if we have,
Well, yeah.
here's the incompatibilities and do we want these or not, then it's just a policy decision of the boards, I'd imagine. So I guess the 2 questions are, how do you want to proceed and how far do you want to proceed? How, what more information could we provide? Because as I said at the beginning, not to try to cut our work, I'm trying not to cut our work short unnaturally or prolong it unnecessarily, especially because we have finite taping budgets and other committees are going to run longer. So I'm going to bring that up and just ask, where people are at. Where do we want to be with this?
Well, I'm curious on the definitions that you're coming up with. This is the town code definitions, Jason. That's hopeful. I'm actually curious about the village's code definitions.
They're a lot longer.
Of that.
And pending, I
And-
think, right?
And what?
Pending?
Yeah, pending. We don't have a final. We've had one meeting with the village board, ZBA, and planning board, and where is that in the process? I think actually we're waiting. We're actually supposed to schedule another meeting on that. Actually,
The town's definitions are, some of them are just pretty silly.
that's
They're
why
so-
we're spending the
they're
money
so
to redo
old.
ours.
They're
Yeah.
just-
Well, and then, yeah.
We're still dealing with a motel, and no one's tried to build a motel in
Ah, yeah.
20 years. And we had a problem with bar restaurant.
Bar
It was not. Is that the one? Bar restaurant. It was
Bar
not defined
restaurant.
anywhere.
Right.
We have half a dozen of them, but it's not defined in the code.
It's that, I think the town would certainly get a great deal out of what you're coming up with on that. And
Well, I mean, what I
you
can
deal with student housing too.
Yeah. What I can
Town doesn't deal
do
with it.
what I can do is maybe I just send this to the village attorney and have him just give a first glance, how much overlap is there. I mean, it could be that you just take our definitions and just drop them whole hog into your code. Though I'm not sure what else would, I can't imagine something you would define except for maybe some agricultural and protected land provisions that we wouldn't have.
May I see this one?
Well, as David mentioned, I think he was saying that even though some of the things are still things that would be wise to define in the zoning code for the town, that there perhaps there hasn't been a recent review of those definitions themselves.
We plug in definitions when we find that the ones that we have just don't work anymore, but it's really a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, and I think it's useful in cases where we don't have definitions, but we have had issues with that same problem. That we look to, if the village has been working on it, it has something that's useful on that we adopt that kind of language.
Yeah.
So it's, hey, we got a consistency, at least one on the definition on it, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel.
That could work well.
And you're even just talking about dealing with applications, because from what I understand, the town doesn't inspect rental units. So yeah, so it's kind of a free-for-all. It's like the Wild West in the town. You kind of rent what you can get. So we have actually I think we have some more fine-grained definitions because we have whole sections of our code about enforcing rental inspections and performance standards for rent for non-owner occupied, and
Registration.
which might be useful anyway for the town to add to the code.
You also have regulations on senior housing that the town doesn't, that I know that those were worked on for quite a while, and that's something that the town needs to.
It was worked on but never implemented.
I mean, it was applied with the Woodland Pond, for example.
Oh, yeah, in the village, yeah.
And right now, Stacy and George are working on new, I don't know, legislation or whatever as far as registering rental homes, foreclosures,
Interesting.
bank-owned properties.
I bring up what could be an interesting issue for planning and town and village as they come together, and that's design standards. In the B3 study, that the B3 district isn't contiguous with town, but it's very close to it. There's a very strong recommendation that there be design standards. There have also been very strong recommendations that there be design standards along the B2 district in the village. I don't know if the town has considered anything of that sort. You have. Well, it would be interesting if we had clashing, if we ever got to the point of having design standards, if they were clashing design standards.
No, I don't think we'd ever get to clashing, but I think, there's a level of detail that goes into design standards. And it may be, one of the things we'd have to look at, ours may be at the 50,000 foot level and yours may be at 1,000 foot level. I mean,
We
to the level of it.
Suggesting as we were walking up here, so quite casually, that as part of a plan, it could be various very detailed and already widely understood and accepted studies that could be incorporated in that plan. One of those would be, for example, the B3 study that was done. There are very specific design standards in there. So it's at a lot lower than the 50,000 foot level. Not that any of those have been implemented. We don't have any design standards.
Oh,
It's in
okay.
the same spot.
Yeah.
We had design standards in the B2 that was looked at, but they were never implemented. And they tried to balance being able to be creative with a design but still have certain features that we knew we wanted. So it's certainly a good copy of that.
Yeah.
Again, they're not formalized, they're not part of the regulations, but it's something that keeps showing up.
Well, so why I'm saying, maybe a pain in the neck to bring this up is that this is not where we've been, but it might be where we want to go. And if we're talking about how to render things compatible, we probably want to go there together rather than separately.
I think we're entering an era now where even as I see national chains popping up, and this is really around the Mid-Hudson Valley, all around, I'm seeing some communities that are that really seem to be pushing and succeeding these chains to create everything from sidewalks to building features that really complement that particular community, and it really pops when you see it. So we're entering an era, I think, where it's feasible, it's not always hard fought, and so therefore practical.
Well, again, those are things that, in order to enforce, you got to get them in code.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, it's tough for a planning board that doesn't have the backing of a code to get somebody to toe the line if they want something like that. So it's something you got to look for to get a little meat in the bones in the zoning code to get some of that criteria in there, even if it's at whatever level you think as a starting point. But, and again, I would agree with both of you on that. That's one of the things that if you're looking at your B1 going into our B2, it's one of the things you want to be consistent down the line. Maybe applicable building, the people don't know where the village starts and the town starts, but if they have the same features going all the way through, it's something that, hey, it doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on, these are the features we're looking for in development. And I think it would be, that's why I'm curious about your B3 design codes too, as it moves up 32 north. Because we've had small lots up on B2 going on 32 north. It's they're small like the village lots. They're not big lots. They're not big development areas or anything else like that. But if someone wanted to come in and develop that or do something there, it'd be nice to bring that theme all the way up 32.
They're small and they tend to be wet too.
Yeah, well, that's
Ours too, they're a little bit bigger, the lots, but they have some of those same issues.
So what do we have to do, I suppose, is the question. Because a lot of what we're talking about is long-term conversation, which is fantastic. And though we should be careful to maybe separate out the things that we can kind of work on going forward, whether or not consolidation goes anywhere or not, which I think some of these process questions is almost immaterial. I mean, we can just do this stuff. And what is it, again, to bring it back to the focus of this suite of subcommittees, what are the planning impacts if we were to consolidate? And I guess, do we have to answer these last two questions? Is my other question to you guys.
Well, I think we've already found, just talking amongst ourselves now, that there are at least a couple of things that in the end would require actual code changes, but I think they're things that are mutually desirable. We talked about design standards that may not have been adopted. We also talked about a setback that may have been reserved in the town portion of 299 on Main Street, where it may have been reserved for something that was planned in the past but not believed to be going to happen. So we've already come upon a few things that again would require changes in the code by the by elected officials, but they are coming up in our discussion.
Well, I think that just backing off, I think 3 things that we can accomplish from here, and whether it goes to consolidation or not is immaterial, is we can get some uniformity in applications process. We can get, whether it's planning board or ZBA, using a consistent set of documents that we've wrestled with in that. We can do some work on getting our abbreviation or definitions in sync with each other. It would be a good time for us to update and tailgate onto what you've done rather than us create, because we're running into a lot of the same issues you're running into with definitions, to where they're consistent across the line. That saves a lot of time too. Now, whether we go to consolidation or not, those 2 things just make it compatible if you're coming into New Paltz as an applicant, whether you're in a village or in a town. These are the same processes, forms, and definitions that you'll be under. And I think those are near-term concrete things we can do on it. Compatibility of zones, we could probably present where we think they're close to it and where they're not and why, and just leave it at that. And that's something that could be picked up at any time later on, regardless of what happens, as something to do with it. But I think those are the things that we can definitely accomplish within the time frame we're talking about.
Compatibility and incompatibilities are something that's more code driven too. There's going to be public hearings and public input, a lot of meetings before those are changed. I think definitions is something, for example, it's whatever happens, if we have a consistent set of definitions, that's good for both communities.
So that's why, again, I agree with you that in public hearings and everything else, all we want to do is present that as the issues that we found. Nothing to draw any conclusions or to lead anywhere going for that. But that's up to the legislative bodies in the village and the town to take a look at, if they want, when they want, and how they want to structure that. All we're going to do is, rather than you say, well, what's different, what's the same? Here's what it is, and go from there. I'm not sure we're brave enough to make a recommendation on it, but at least we can identify the issues different, and whether they raise to the level of being significant or not, it's really up to the legislative body on it. I think that's your call on it.
I agree, those 2 things, the definitions and then the forms and process could be pursued right away, maybe for the next meeting.
What about the issue of the fee structures? Should we move
I'm sorry, the issue of
the fee structure?
Oh, yeah.
Should we angle towards a uniform set of fees for the same kind of activity?
I think, God, what I would do, rather than put the village and town under the hook of how they structure their budgets and everything else, is we can put together how we do our fees. You can put together do the fees, and we can see if there's any similar. Where do you want to go from there? And give it to the, like Jason and the town, the opportunity to do what they want with it.
Well, we're not in a position to make any changes of any sort here, but
Though we are
what we're trying to do is come up with ideas that could be in the form of recommendations.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not sure that the fees should be identical just automatically, because when talking to Katie, I realized that we would have, at every meeting, we would have a lawyer present. We have to pay that lawyer. Yeah. Your ZBA might not.
Also, you've got, for a building inspector, for example, you've got 30-some square miles to cover. We've got 2. So just the time it takes to do a single appointment is probably triple for the town, even for if everything else were identical. But not to let the ball drop either is one of the things, after a couple things clear off the plate, we're actually going to be looking at the village fee structure in total. Everything we charge people $1 for is going to, because if I'm going to propose to the board that we pull all of those dollar figures out of the code altogether and have it a separate schedule that would be kind of reauthorized at every organizational meeting. So you have to physically adopt every fee, so we don't have something 20 years later we're still charging $25, and so in real dollars we're charging them $1.99 for what was $25 in 1985. So I figured, you know, even down to the FOIL request or a handicap parking permit, to the ZBA fees, to escrows, to everything is indexed in one place. So we can just do that, and especially if Linda's already done that work, we can just see if look at the same factors you looked at and plug in our numbers, and you know, kind of use your formula. Would be fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing that jumped out at me is I don't know that we know how much we're spending right now to do the job of the ZBA or do the job of planning. That's one question. The other question is, what do we need to be spending to do the job well? Sometimes you can be very economical in your meetings and end up costing yourself a lot of money in the long run by not seeking legal counsel at the appropriate moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think we need to look at that.
Yeah.
I don't want to gouge anyone, but I think we owe it to everyone in the village to make the best informed decisions that we can. You know, our time is free, but we need good advice.
Yeah. It's the trap kind of all of us are, you know, gotta be careful in the rush to not raise taxes. We don't end up with the phrase being penny wise and pound foolish.
Yeah.
So I think-
But I mean, with these
That's
fees, if
escrow,
we've got a justification for
But
why.
we need to make sure the escrows are where they should be and all that.
Yeah.
Sure.
But I mean, I think we should be able to say, this takes the secretary so much time to do, it
Right.
costs X amount of money, it costs the building inspector X amount of time, and, you know, this is the true cost of the building inspector.
And maybe we don't charge
There's-
residents for some things because it's just covered in your taxes. If
Well,
you live in
no.
New Paltz and you want to build something, you don't get charged a building permit fee. But if you come from outside and want to build something, you get charged whatever. Within reason. I just made that up and it's on TV, so I'm going to get in trouble for it later.
Right, well, but I mean, the point is, I think that some sort of cost study would be a good
Yeah.
thing to do periodically and get an understanding, because I can't really defend whether $75 is too much or too little.
Right.
I'm guessing it's too little.
I think so too, and I don't even know when the last time the fees were revised, but I do know this, that while you may want village council to get a lot more specific than I, however, if you look in village law, general city law, and town law, you'll see that municipalities are certainly authorized to recoup what they spend on staff, everything down to office supplies, revising of master plans. Those are expected to be recouped rather than general costs to the taxpayers, in the same way that applications, whether it be via escrow and or application fees, are intended to be recouped. And you can imagine if it weren't for escrow, very small towns, for example, in the Adirondacks, could be absolutely overwhelmed overnight by a major developer going in and acquiring parcels. They could crush a community of a few hundred just by the review costs if it weren't for the escrow system that's allowed.
Developers don't really believe that they can come in and the whole village has to pay for the review. I mean, they're used to escrow fees, they expect that.
We have them. Just
We
make sure
have,
they're high enough.
yeah.
Well, they're
Or
dollars
calibrated
per hour.
enough, yeah.
Yeah, and
They
they're
need to
calibrated,
make
as you say.
sure that they pay for all the consultants, all of the time that it takes to process that.
Mhm.
That's-
But, you know, we generally don't do things like amortize office supplies or probably the life cycle cost of the, I mean, you really look at the
Yeah.
entire operating budget of the building department with
Yeah.
the general overhead of the village folded in, divide it by X, and that'd be the dollar per hour. It's a lot more than one salary per hour to process applications.
Yeah. And, you know, now we are expecting to receive this by email. There is the cost of whatever you're paying for your information infrastructure
Mhm.
to communicate efficiently. You're probably not mailing as much paper out, you're probably not photocopying as much, but, you know, your IT expenses ought to be figured into that as
Mhm.
well.
It's a part of it, yeah.
I think we can safely assume it probably isn't for anyone except the ZBA after Linda got through with her
Yeah.
fees. All right, so what do we get?
Question, has the village passed its new definition? It has not.
We're in the midst of it.
Okay, because I would certainly be interested in seeing a copy of that.
I'm sure we can send you a copy of the draft. I mean, we've had a public meeting or two about it. The planning board and
So
ZBA
it's
has.
pretty much firmed up.
I don't know what Joe was changing. I don't remember.
If
off
it's
the top of my
okay,
head.
I'll convey a copy.
Yeah, just
Yeah, send it, yeah.
Certainly, to the chairman of both
Yep.
town planning board and town ZBA.
And to Dave, I think. Did you want to see them, or you just?
Certainly.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some good information.
Yes.
Okay, so do we need to meet again? And if so, what are we meeting about? Do we want to talk about what you and Rich are going to deal with, or were you saying that you wanted to just kick that to the legislative bodies after the fact?
No, I want to I'll sit down with Rich and maybe Kurt, and we'll go over what's in each of the zones, the uses, and see where they're similar, where they're not, and just kind of get up a list of that kind of information. I mean, it's public information. The stuff's up there. Just bring it together and highlights where we think there are significant incompatibilities and where we think the other things are not significant, and just make that a document or a presentation on it. Just to be consistent, we can date it 2012 because things change after a while. But I think one of the things that we should look for, and maybe I'll need a little more space on this, but getting together with Kurt, looking at if we can come up with something that's meaningful and Tom on a checklist for planning and zoning, see where we're have something like that going forward. We're going to talk about the definitions and the compatibility of the commercial districts is probably what I have to sit with Kurt and Rich down on a date certain, and then do it.
It would be mutually beneficial, both for me on behalf of the village as well.
Yeah.
As this project. Yeah.
So I think those are a couple of things I would want to work on, and I think then I can get together with this board and show the results and take it from there. Where we go with it and what we want to do with it and how do we want to do with it. But I think that gets to basically most of those questions without getting into the higher level of legislative actions. What do we want to do from a policy point of view on it, type of thing. I think those are still outstanding issues, and maybe from a committee point of view, we should talk about how to handle it.
I may ask that if we didn't meet again, where are we? And are we a non-official or are we an official body? And if we're an official body, don't we have to make a report to somebody, either to the world at large or back to the village board and the town board, saying something? We had a good time, got to know each other a little bit better, got on TV yet again.
So that's why you volunteer for these things.
You bet.
I'm not really sure how to answer that question. I mean, yes, we should have something, and that's why I keep asking that one specific question over and over again, because this is not a general joint planning commission that we're establishing. It's it's planning experts to answer these specific questions, and I'm gonna I want to know. I'm gonna ask until people tell me yes or no over and over again. Do you guys feel that we've met these goals, that we agreed to get together to,
I thought
after Mike's...
As far as ZBA is concerned,
Yes.
we have agreed that, basically that the village should use the town forms.
Yeah.
Take a look at it and see what they need.
Is there any opinion, one way or the other, about the impact of consolidation on planning? Are the two related in any way, shape, or form?
If I might suggest,
go ahead.
yes, I think that, let's say that with regard to, and it comes back to a final report, we might be mentioning things that we tackled and accomplished, whereas other things we didn't delve too far into other than to identify because they truly are policy matters. And that's where I suppose the next threshold is.
Yeah, I think that's where we would come up with. We can move towards a common form, because I've been looking at revising the checklist, so this is an opportunity to do that. We can look at common definitions of where we think they fit in properly. So if you're looking at a common planning board, we're moving in that direction, but we can definitely light up the compatibility issues associated with the different zones and how they surround. But again, moving out of those zones is, as Gert said, it goes up to the next level. It's legislative issues. It's something else. I'm not sure if we're brave enough to make recommendations, but we can point out where they are and how they merge or don't merge, how they make sense or don't make sense, where the bigger issues are on that. I think that's
So
I think that's what you're going to get out of this
Yeah.
committee.
Does that? I'm really looking. I mean,
Yeah. That makes sense to me. I don't see that, I think that's, I'd like to see that the village definitions, when they're firmed up, it doesn't make too much sense to look at it before they're firmed up, even though I'd like an advanced copy.
Oh, yes, no,
Oh yeah,
certainly,
I don't think it.
And
but
then-
we can mention the ongoing work that'll happen
Yeah.
after. I mean,
Yeah.
that is on.
And let me ask you, I asked this, I think, once before, I never got it clear in my own head. How did this group come about? How did this committee come about?
This committee came about because when the consolidation study was finally finished and presented to the public at a meeting last January, the town and village boards voted, the majority voted to accept the study and move to the next step of consolidation, which, because of issues with the study and because of data that was not in the study that some folks thought was necessary, Sally Rhodes and Susan Zinnick got together and created a framework to kind of finish the research needed for the consolidation study. And they created a suite of these subcommittees under the joint town and village boards that would look at various facets of the community vis-a-vis consolidation. So there's finance, human resources, facilities, all the things that Susan and I could think of. And each was kind of a wish list of the people who were kind of appointed, and then the town and village boards just adopted it kind of as a suite, and that was that. And so we budgeted 6 meetings each, and each subcommittee is given a certain set of tasks, and it is up to the town and village boards to figure out how to collate and assess that. And we haven't begun that conversation yet.
So these are citizen study committees, in effect. They're not.
These are supposed to finish the consolidation study to the point where we could make a decision as a community,
Okay.
to provide us with enough data to make an informed decision.
Is someone expecting a written report?
No written report has been asked of anybody, but we will write one up.
Okay.
So I would myself would be disappointed if I went home and messed it up. We've done it, so we're not going to meet again. It's great. I'm
It
going on
depends on if
vacation anyhow.
we've done it. That's what I've been asking.
But if Kurt and Mike and Maurice didn't meet and come up with something that showed at least a convergence, if not a uniformity of the planning documents, I would say, well, it's just, as they said in the Middle Ages, flutum vocis. It's just puffs of air.
Well, we do have some substantive things that have come out, and what I was going to propose, maybe if no one else has an opinion, is that Mike, since you and Rich are doing really the one relatively complicated thing, we might be able to just simply, whatever you and he come up with, tack on the 2 or 3 other points we've raised that we've done. We're looking at process and fines and definitions, and that's our report. This is what was done. These are the and that's it.
Yeah.
And once you and Rich have met and written that up, and I'll be happy to add that in if you're not interested in adding that little preamble to it. But we can simply email that to everyone who's attended, and if enough people want to get together and talk or have issues with it, I'll happily set up a meeting. But if people are fine not meeting again and resting on that, we can do that.
Well, we'll do 2 things. If I can get Rich and you, we'll set up and discuss that, and then Maurice and you on a checklist. Then we'll put together a package. We'll figure out how we put the package, and then we'll send it out to everybody again, and ask for comments and whether we want to meet and discuss it, or find out whether Yeah, well, we really should have.
Why don't we see what you come up with first
Yeah.
and see where.
And that's what I'll leave it open like.
If there is obvious consensus, there's no point in having a meeting. But if we want to, if there's things to talk about, we can.
Yeah, I'm
That's
sure
fine.
I'm sure there are going to be holes. That's what people will say. Well, wait a minute, you didn't really talk about this or address that. That's why we may have a need for follow-up meeting to plug in things so everybody's comfortable with the report on it. So I think we can do that. But I'll work with Kurt and setting those things up, and I'll let him give you feedback on where we are and what we're doing on that one.
Sounds
Okay?
good.
As far as the definitions are concerned, I think Stacy is the one that really should be involved, you know, from the town, Stacy and Dave, of course.
Yeah.
You know, from the town's point of view on that. But I'll be happy to take a copy of your material.
No, Kurt's going to send it out. We can just forward it to Stacy and Kelly.
Sure.
That's no problem.
Fine, okay.
Yeah, we'll take care of that.
Get her reaction to what you guys are proposing.
The only other one I got is a question, and it probably has to do with some of the compatibility issues, but the infrastructure group or facilities group, where, how, and what they propose doing may have an impact on when we're looking at compatibility of zones and allowances and things, or things that are allowed in each of the zones on it. So I think.
Well, I'd imagine they wouldn't be looking necessarily at laying new infrastructure, but since it's two agencies that both maintain it, it'd more be joint management of what we have.
Okay.
I'd imagine. I don't know.
I haven't been to. I knew they met, and I couldn't make it. That they've met one. That's one of the consolidation groups, right? And they had one meeting, and I wasn't there at that meeting. But I was just wondering what their tasks or their questions were on that.
Yeah, I have no idea.
I have a little bit of that on email, as Ellen had provided it, as she oversees that committee. So I can provide a little bit of a summary of what they're tackling on that infrastructure committee.
Okay.
I was at the meeting, they're looking at the obvious, the water, sewer, sidewalks, lighting districts, which there is no actual lighting districts in the town. Just trying to look at that hard stuff.
Well, and again, just to know where they're going with it and latching on or not latching on or making comments on that, I think it's necessary. Do you know when they're meeting again?
28th.
28th.
Next Tuesday.
7 o'clock up here, right?
Yep.
Anything else? Any other thoughts, comments? Thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
Brief meeting.
Okay, so we do not have another meeting scheduled.
We're going to wait to hear from Rich and Kurt
So
and
someone will
Mike.
communicate with us by
Yes.
email?
Yep.
I will, between Kurt and I will use the same email that Adriana used to send out the minutes.
Yeah, that list, yeah.
That's the list I'll send out.
Definitions in our code.
Is there a definition of?
You're on it if you got the minutes from the last meeting.
Family.
Well, then you're not on it. This is the list.
Yeah.
Is there a definition
Be good.
of two-family?